Welcome into another episode of Discard for Magic. We are back this week with part 2 of our Gate episode with Exile and Cherez. Hope you enjoy.
I usually like, even when playing aggressive factions, to have a first gate dedicated to being like a stable position, right? And then maybe using second and third gates to further a push, right? Chibber Fey actually have like really fun progression where I play, E4 gate a lot of the time because it's just a really nice gate position that you can get on turn 1 if you want, with Namira moving up 2, and a structure that I play around a lot. And so usually like that's the first gate. And then we go a little bit, and maybe I use the second gate to like get in front of my opponent's like 10 gate or like a flank 5 gate, like on my F file, that kind of thing. A stepping stone, if you will, to like further the aggression deeper. And then usually that last gate is like a flex kind of thing. Okay, I could put this gate maybe as a tactic, right? Either to end the game or just take a really strong position where you like put it down and summon off of it immediately with scout, or to like replace a destroyed gate, right? Like if my opponent clears that E4 gate, or maybe it's farther due to high tide, or they clear the gate that's in front of theirs, then this gate can reinforce and just take back the spot right back before they could do anything with it. But gates for like aggression can be used as like stepping stones almost to like push farther. And pushing without a gate, I think, as we might have mentioned earlier, can be really, really risky / bad, because if you're running at your opponent, but the only thing you can do to like summon new units is 5 spaces away, unless you're like Wayfarers or something, then that might be tough to, have a unit like crawl up multiple turns to just get to the front lines.
How often do you guys feel like you hold on to a 5 gate for multiple turns?
This is something that often used to beat me. For the longest time, Water D was a player that would beat me a lot, and I wouldn't know why. And one thing he would do was hold on to a gate when I was attacking his gates. So I'd either like almost destroy his last one or destroy his last one and think, oh, I've got him. I've destroyed his gates. And meanwhile, he's got all these units on the board and another gate in hand. And I was like, oh, you just drew your gate at the right time. I was like, no, I was holding on to it, letting you attack my gates. So I think it's actually can be kind of good to hold on to a gate when your gates are being attacked for whatever reason.
That makes sense. Baiting your opponent into thinking that they could destroy your gates, but actually you've got them in your hand. I did this to Aaron.
I think I'm just going to plead the fifth on that one because I've never held on to a card, so...
You're notorious for just discarding your entire deck.
Yeah. No, I hold on to gates occasionally. I probably hold on to gates less than some other players do, because not that I don't value them, but if like I feel my gate spots are secure, I sometimes will value getting the magic from that and using my units and my event cards more than holding onto the gate. But if I'm pushing, or if I don't think my gates are going to be secure, or if I'm playing against a faction where I know I shouldn't be discarding gates, like Cave Goblins or Drake's Son or somebody who will take my gates out, then I will just hold on to it. But it depends. There's certain instances, and there's also some factions we haven't really talked about a whole lot, which are structure-based, and you can pitch gates more willy-nilly. Like, I pitch most of my gates as Sand Goblins or Polar Dwarves. Same with Forge, just because you have the ability to get most of your units out just by building them if you need to, so...
I will hot disagree on discarding gates as Forged. I actually barely discard the gates with them, just because this gets into more faction specifics, but it actually is nice to have summoning spots as the inventor, but also because Forged in Flame exists, and because you have things like Modular and Magcogs and all of this fun goodness, just 0 cost 5 health structures is a thing that Forged loves. Sometimes, Barricade's nice where you can use it in the attack phase, but I play non-attack phase barricades, or barricades that I guess I could have played during the build phase and not really mattered at all, surprisingly often. And I mean, at that point, a gate is, I think, strictly better than a barricade.
Yeah.
Outside of like Helma, recycling it and stuff like that.
I think one of the better examples of a faction that likes to discard gates, though, when Orange Lazarus came on, he said for the Polar Dwarves, he'll often discard gates because of Ice Golems existing.
Mm-hmm.
Not only are they a structure you can place like other structures, but they also are a gate. So I think we can get into some of the other factions that have more gates too, like the Skyspear Avians and your Guild Dwarves and your Swamp Orcs. How often they might discard gates too.
For newer players also, I think the first gate which you draw, you usually almost always play. And then after that, it becomes more situational. Like you said, if you're pushing up, you definitely want a gate. Otherwise, you can't reinforce yourself. And also, if you're against aggressive factions and they're pushing at you, usually you want to keep your gate. If they clog one gate spot, you have another one in the far corner, which they can't get to. Or to keep just your summoner safe, I think are the main ones there. Also, hyper late game, sometimes it's fun to always just have the last card gate that's with any card, confuse your opponent. But I think usually the first gate definitely play. I think, is there a faction which doesn't want to play the first gate? I don't think there's. Maybe Chosen Grove, or like you said, Forge or something like that. But I think in general,
Maybe Chosen Grove.
Like range factions, like Isle of Vecid actually. I mean, usually they'll play one gate, but like there are times when you don't even necessarily need to play one. You can just operate after 10 get alone.
I'll make a guess based on a player that I saw saying they discard gates a lot, and perhaps Fallen Kingdom doesn't need their gates as much.
I could see that.
You might discard their gates because you have Blood Summon and Retalis to summon stuff that sometimes your gates could just get in the way, potentially.
I think that's also probably dependent on playstyle too. Like I'm pretty sure that was Dark Thomby that said that.
Yeah.
And they play Fallen Kingdom in a very like combo burst oriented fashion. Versus I think probably Devood, who plays Fallen Kingdom in a more like grindy way. Might disagree with that. I think he plays a fair amount of gates as Fallen Kingdom.
Fallen Kingdom's definitely an interesting faction because I mean that's where Donkey Stacks came from, right? Fallen Kingdoms can play with crazy. They like gates side by side compared to other factions. I'm not sure why, to be honest. I've been thinking about it before this podcast. Why Fallen Kingdoms love gates side by side, but for some reason it just works for them. It feels good when I do it.
I think it's because of Archer, right?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons. They can spot steal really easily with Archer and Carrier, and they can also get around easier than other factions with like Blood Summon, so you can get around those units and like take back those gates if you need to. So yeah, there's a fair amount, and now that they also have, they didn't always have this, but now that they have Gul'das as a summoning point as well, that also can factor into it. But yeah, Archer and Carrier have always made taking back those spaces fairly easy for the most part.
I was having a conversation with Neshley about this, and I think it's because of like Retalis can raise an archer, and then you don't really usually have to move that archer, so you can just teleport through the gate a lot of the time. But there is something to be said of, I think the top of that conversation was that despite like the crazy like archer movement, like Blood Summon reach, Fallen Kingdom are a deck that only has 3 moves and can get bogged down by like limited movement a lot. And if you're being really, really precise with your positioning, then you could actually summon more like undead warriors off of Retalis by like bringing him further up. And in that case, you wouldn't want your side-by-side gates because the gate shelf is nice to park Retalis behind and have him keep sending archers over and spot stealing in front of. But if you're putting him more forward, then maybe you'd want a different gate structure, which I guess kind of just goes to show like how complicated of a thing like gate positioning is, because even within the same faction, you might have really different gate structures just depending on what you're trying to get out of the position. Whether that's your own personal play style, a matchup, or even just a board state within a given matchup, putting gates in different spots and positioning differently around them, because they are kind of like the terrain of Summoner Wars, so to speak, is something that's really dynamic, fluid, and I don't think hard, fast rules, static placements, so to speak, do you justice a lot of the time.
Yeah, 100%.
That's probably fair.
Another weird one kind of is it a faction-specific discussion. It's like, I find with Obsidian Dwarves, I like to just put gates randomly next to myself, like my summoner, or behind him, just because if you don't have enough Ember Guards, it's just another way to cover a flank. It might be a turn where you're like Volcanic Blast and destroy everything else, and even damage that gate, but maybe you did like 2 or 3 damage, and then you still have that gate standing to protect yourself a little bit, just for a little bit longer, and to give them another threat to think about, like, oh, more stuff could come out of this gate if I don't deal with it, and then just that gate being there is enough of a distraction to save some damage on Balzar.
That's a great point, Jexic. I think Balzar, in this case, even though it's a more aggressive deck, Balzar doesn't have any movement mechanics outside of the 2 move which it has. So it has a very similar gate placement to, for example, Crimson Order Vanguards, which want their summoner to be part of the action, but also to keep it safe. One of the ways you do that is by gate placement.
What are some mistakes that you often see people make with gates?
We already talked a bit about forward gates, splitting your opponent, getting in front of them. One, I guess, that we haven't talked about that kind of was just tangentially mentioned was sometimes like boxing yourself in with a gate, essentially giving your opponent a tool to pin your summoner with. Usually pretty wary about a gate behind a summoner, because it means that if you can get surrounded on 2 flanks and then the front, or even just the two flanks, you can't directly back up regardless of what you're doing unless you're a flight summoner, right? Ava, or have some other mobility to get out of there, right? Like a gate behind your summoner can just cut off a retreat. And I think I had a game relatively recently against Filth, I want to say. I think it was actually the SW Zone League game where I was playing Savannah Elves, and Demagogue pushed up and went in front of my 10 gate and then put a gate behind himself, or maybe the gate was already there and he like zealed in front of it or something. And then I put a gate on the other side of him and then Rhino on the other side, and he stayed there until he died. Because gates are these like immovable things that cannot attack, sometimes can't be affected by certain things like auto damage and things like that. They can be a thing, whether it's yours or your opponent's, that you can use to be pinned or get pinned. So just be on the watch out for that, I suppose.
Another one similar to what I was talking about earlier is you have summoners which want to be part of the action. For example, Sarah, the Crimson Order summoner, Balzahar, and you block their attack lanes with your gates. Or, especially better players do this, they'll just play around where your summoner can move and prevent, Balzahar from getting boost and Sarah from getting back units by just playing in front of the gates which Vanguards and OD allow them to. I think that's usually one, like Exile said, making it easier for your opponent to corner you or prevent you from retreating or force your summoner to stay or units to stay on one side of the board versus another is very common. Usually against cloaks, you see this a lot because a lot of times your opponent will needs something, but like is so afraid of dagger, they'll place either a gate or a unit behind their summoner in a certain way. Can help you as cloaks because then that prevents a retreat path. I think those are the two off the top of my head I can really think which are the big no-nos, or at least what you need to think about when you place a gate.
I'd agree with that.
I'm going to toss in another one that I think happens a bit more than people probably think about, and it's often like counterintuitive. I've seen a fair amount of players, I've done this myself as well, and I've seen a lot of high-level players do this even. Destroying a gate when you don't necessarily have a need to.
Oh, that's a good one.
Like you have an extra attack, just like, I should use it on this gate because I could, destroy the gate. But there's so many times I've seen that either open up a game-winning play, or I had one game where I was winning as Tundra Orcs versus Vargrath, and I destroyed one of their gates because I was putting a fair amount of gate pressure on them, and they did like a ramming advance martial forces and killed Grognak to win the game. They rolled pretty good dice, but that was like their chance to win the game, was me opening up that gate spot.
And on that same note, even, it's sometimes not even destroying the gate, it's just damaging the gate enough that something else can destroy the gate. Because then you're up there and you're like, I got one more attack, I might as well have Grognak hit this 5 gate. And then he does 3 damage to it, and now it only needs 2 damage to be destroyed for something to attack through it and finish off Grognak, or whatever the situation might be. Really think about whether you need to destroy that gate or even attack it. Even if you have the free attack, you might not want to use it to damage that gate, unless destroying the gates is part of your strategy and will actually make you safer. But sometimes it doesn't make you safer because you're losing that cover.
Another similar example as well goes to Endgame, where Endgame is always so fascinating to me in Summoner Wars. Suddenly your gates become actually liabilities, and your opponent's gates become boons. Because if you're down to like the endgame, it's close. And a lot of the time, inactivity didn't exist. You would kind of just want to run away from your opponent. It's kind of a whoever attacks first can like win, right? Having like a gate to attack is a big, important thing. And I've won many end games that I quote unquote shouldn't, because I realized just a little bit earlier than my opponent that actually I don't want my gates on the field anymore. I've got like 2 cards in hand. One of them's an event and the other one's a champion I can't play or something. Okay, well, my gates aren't doing anything beneficial for me for summoning. And the cover that they're providing isn't really cover anymore, because I actually just kind of want to have something to hit, and I don't want my opponent to have something to hit. So, as counterintuitive as it might seem, it would be really bad to attack your opponent's gates getting into endgame, and better to actually attack your own. So, a thing I'll often do is, as we're transitioning into that last final stage, pivot from, if I have that spare attack, I'll chuck it on one of my own gates that I'm like, yeah, that can die, it's fine. And it can matter because it can essentially be like a turn of an activity that your opponent has to take, or they have to like migrate to a different part of the board because that gate's not healthy enough for them to, spend 1 attack a turn chipping. Doesn't happen super often. Also depends on your play style, but if you get into those endgame situations, I would say destroy your own gates, not your opponent's.
One thing which we didn't mention, but one more rarely used, but still super, when it works, it's amazing. uses for gates is box your opponent's aggressive summoner in, and so they can't retreat gates. Whether it's blocking your back row against cloaks, or just your opponents in your last 2 rows, and you can just summon 2 gates in front of them so they can't actually have a place to retreat.
Every faction can use the back 3 rows to drop gates, and sometimes it ends up being really, really good.
Yeah, you got to be careful when you're playing as an aggressive summoner not to push up into those back 3 rows. It can be real brutal. This was actually in a playtest game, playtesting a faction against Polar Dwarves. It was just in their third to the back row, so I was like, oh, they can't place a gate behind me. But then Savara moved up into a position I wasn't expecting, placed a gate, and then shifted it behind me. And I was like, same outcome. I'm still stuck. Yeah, stuff like that you got to be very careful about.
Should we talk about specialized gates?
Yeah, I mean, so what we've got: Skyspear Avians, Swamp Orcs, Guild Dwarves, and then I would also kind of chuck the normal gate for certain factions into that list as well. Like off the top of my head, I would put Guild Dwarf normal gate, as well as like Shimmer Sea Fey gate, Forged gate. Sure, there's others that I'm thinking off of.
Or
So
Vanguards with the fact they have
yeah,
renewed hope.
yep, that's another good one.
Chosen Grove.
Oh yes, Chosen Grove's another great one too. What do you guys think about Airy Gate?
I was talking to Nestle before this, and he said, the only thing I want you to say is that if you are playing Skyspear Avians, make sure your Aryan gates are in your last row. That's what he said. No forward Aryan gates. The 3 health gates in general, you have to be very careful with their positioning. Swamp Orcs also, you always want to keep that one protected, because that's your
Boost engine.
boost engine, exactly. With Avians, people haven't really explored it too much in the past, but I think Nestle recently, with his Faction Masters games, have really sparked a lot of discussion with the back row area gates. Just the power of the +1 boost, where you can just summon basically 2 units in the same spot, or multiple, not even 2, like up to 4 units from the same spot.
I think area gates are criminally underrated, because the way I think about them is essentially it's a gate that kind of exists in almost superposition, even if it's just a corner area gate. A1 area gate is basically giving you the same summoning options as both a A2 and B1 gate. And the important thing is that it's doing that without actually being in those spots. So it's one step further away from your opponent being able to hit it. It lets you could say the same for like B1 is kind of giving you the same options as A1, B2, and C1, which is really, really cool. It doesn't get in the way. It's less of a liability. That's the thing I guess we haven't talked about as much. Gates are a strength, but they also really can be a liability in end games, but also we've mentioned like cover, occupying squares, and your opponent like playing around those squares essentially being occupied and safe. So area gate, I think, is just beautiful in that it is very unlikely, if you're using it right, to be a liability. It's just kind of all gravy.
As much as you want to put the area gates and the vine gates towards your back rows, often I think with the vine gates, you often even want to put a regular gate in front of it, like in your third row, and a vine gate in your first row. I think Guild Dwarf gates are like, the Baldar's gate is totally different, because it's often like your win con, it feels like, especially like in deck building, people have been using them very aggressively. And it can be placed under blueprints to be placed in different phases. So I think it's almost a completely different beast than those other 2 gates.
Yeah. I mean, Baldur's Gate is a fantastic card because it, unlike the other 3 health gates, it gets its value when you play it, which is a big thing. You can kind of use it, and also like I guess just on Guild Wars in general, because Olden can just pick stuff up. It makes both Baldur's Gate and your normal 5 gate Svara. This is also true of her as well. Is that like your opponent really can't take cover in front of your gates, at least if Svara can move and is in a 3 square radius of where she could move to move the thing out of the way, and if Olden could reach that gate. So that alone makes both of the gates for those factions just a lot kind of harder to approach. You can't use them as cover a lot of the time, which is really big. Guild Dwarves also, their normal gate I think is also really underrated, because it's a thing that you can pick up with Olden, which means that a really good way to approach with them is you can just walk Olden up, put a gate in front of them, maybe chip something else, or even just take an activity. And your opponent now has to decide, okay, do I ignore this gate? They can summon off of it. That's annoying. Do I clog it? Okay, well, they could just pick it up, put something where it was that can attack and do things, and then kind of kill the stuff that I used to clog it. Do I kill it? Okay, cool. Olden can just move through where it was without having to, spend the move to pick it up, and just keep going. So like it can be a really, really good catch-22 where you just, no matter what your opponent does, you can kind of just use this 5 health gate and just pick it up and essentially use it as a shield for Olden to approach and to kind of like bait reactions out of their opponent.
Mhm.
So it's a thing that I think is highly underrated for guild dwarves in particular.
Yeah, I think they can definitely use it just to like protect different units too. And with your architects, like gates are never really, even if you can't pick it up, they're not really in the way for the most part because you can always just like shift them around a little bit. Similar to like if you're playing gates with polar dwarves and you're using them like either to boost your frost mages or just protect a flank or something of that nature, or just set up a like ram shift later on. Because Savara can shift them around, they're just not always in the way or never really as much of like a bad spot to place it. Like you can place it where it works best for that turn and not worry about the repercussions for future turns as much. I still should think about them a little bit, but not as much. Another interesting mistake I've seen people make is when playing against polar dwarves, not remembering that they can shift the gate and having Savara just shift a gate to shoot you or shoot a unit that you use to block their gate or shoot the summoner to win. I've seen that happen a couple times. They're like, I blocked all the spots they can get to me. They can't summon, they can't do anything. Shift the gate. Oh, I'm dead.
Yep.
Definitely. What are your thoughts on gates as swamp orcs, Aaron? Because you are the current champion.
Permanent champion.
I think Swamp Orcs gates, I tend to place the Vine Gate kind of like James was saying. If I have that option, I'll place it in like my back row. It does like depend a bit on how I'm positioned. Sometimes I'll place it in like my second to back row if that's a better spot for me to get some summons off of it. I will place them somewhere forward occasionally, and that's more like if I already have one set up. If I have a Vine Gate set up in the back and I've been boosting off that and I'm not like hurting for boosts, sometimes I'll use a forward one to sort of threaten them because then they have to either like deal with that or deal with Mug or deal with Blub, or I can give them another thing that's just a big threat because a Vine Gate that's forward can really punish somebody if they don't deal with it because you can easily get like a Bog Witch off that or two. And then just drop in with Mug and throw a ton of dice at them. So I've used that to some success, but I often will only do that after I've set one up pretty securely in the back that I can continue. Sometimes I'll even put a Vine Gate on the opposite side of where I'm playing. So like I'll place a Vine Gate, say on the like right side of the board, even if I have all my units on the left side of the board. Because Mug's range is 3 to grab boosts to use for the attack, I can still get units into that range. That can be very useful. Depends on the situation, but that's sometimes a trick that I'll use. Is might seem like it's not well positioned or it's out of the way, but because you have that 3 range, you can still get a lot of boost onto Mug's attacks that way. I often will do what James is saying and place a normal gate in front of the Vine Gate if I place them in my back row, just to protect them more and you don't lose any of those summoning spots, but often you're just trying to build the swamp. So
Do you place it with base in between, or would you place them directly adjacent?
a space in between. So the normal gate would be on like row 3, and then the Vine Gate would be on row 1.
That makes sense.
And normally it's dead corner. So it's like either A or F.
I was just reminded of something I think is kind of unique to the A3 and F3 gate, or just anything in A and F, is that not only does it kind of give you an access to that flank, but also kind of cut something off, because like something on the edge of the board you can't go around. You know what I mean? This is something I'm thinking about sometimes. Is that so? Not only is it like a good spot for you to attack from, but it's also like a good place to go hide later.
That's a great point.
It is a double-edged sword, though, of like one of my favorite things from Receive is when people have A or F gates, like F3, A3, those kinds of ones, and being able to tuck a like champion there for Spearhead, their 4th row, your 5th row, I suppose. Because they can only, if there's a gate there, they can only be attacked through one flank, which with their 4 health, and also if you have other things there, they're basically just safe and can give you a permanent spearhead. Now, granted, that's a pretty specific like faction thing, but I guess like losing control of those spots, I think hurts even harder, I suppose. They are really nice though, because you have that like flank presence.
I've also done that as sand goblins, because sand goblins have so much force with like thrusters and swapping with like silts and stuff. If your opponent has a gate on one of those far sides, sometimes I will hug that side with sand goblins and just punish anything that comes out. Can work pretty well.
Another thing which I was thinking about is similar to what you were saying, Aaron. Another mistake a lot of people make, and we actually saw this. I was reminded of this by looking at the filth, and I remember the Vexer Davoud finals where Vexer said that one of the mistakes he made as the filth against the Avians was he basically had these gate positions which were a little bit more passive, but also made it very hard for Demigog to actually push up and get within range to get the harvest off, so within 3 of its units. So that's something which you always need to be careful of, especially with summoners which need to be involved, whether it's through ores or whether it's through attacks, to make sure that your summoner has a way of getting engaged, as well as a way to fall back at some point.
Yeah, I think that's very important. If you don't have that aspect of retreat, that can be real rough.
Thinking about the next one's Wayfarers. When you're against the Wayfarers, something always fun to do to prevent Seek the Horizon is always have gates matching the same columns as their gates. That way, those pesky adventurers have a hard time of proccing Seek the Horizon. It's always very annoying to deal with when you play the Wayfarers.
Yeah, just as much as there's like faction specific tips to play your gate for that faction, I think there's also like almost equally as much of like faction specific tips of playing against a faction. Like we've talked about, like we've alluded to like Cave Goblin gate destruction being really scary, and how your gates are precious a lot of the times to that matchup for most factions outside of like structure based factions and the like, because the fact that they can eat your gates so quickly, using gates as like insulators for against storm goblins, and what you just mentioned about wayfarers. I think for every single faction you could probably come up with both tips to play them and tips to play against them.
Yeah, 100%.
One other like faction specific gate use, kind of like specialty gates, would be for renewed hope off of vanguards and just scouts out of Shimmersea Fae. Those are the, I think, only 2 factions that can summon off of a gate the turn that they play it, which presents all sorts of really fun extra tactical depth. The ability to summon a unit effectively 2 spaces away from your summoner, probably the easiest way I think to think about it, in the middle of like the attack phase or something of that nature, can weaponize them the same turn. Well, I think most other factions, when you're playing a gate, it is for, unless you're using it to block a space, whether it's for like cover or to pin or something of that nature. If you're using it for summoning, it's for the following turn, but those 2 factions can use it in the same one.
And the third one would be Guild Wars. But yes, that's a
Yes.
good point.
Guild Wars just get to do it by themselves, just with Baldur's Gate. But I guess, unless anybody has other like faction specific stuff, talked briefly about how often we discard gates for magic, which sounds like it depends on the player, the matchup.
Probably both.
Yeah, and I think the general tip is to probably not discard too many gates, because the worst case scenario, you have like a 5 hit point blocking thing for free.
Really good health ratio.
Yeah, good health ratio, but the thing to keep in mind is just to not place it in a bad spot, I guess, that actually hinders you more or gives your opponent more cover, that type of thing.
General rule, I think having more gates matters if you are aggressing or your opponent is aggressing. Like if you're playing both factions want to stay back, then I feel like probably both sides want to play like 1 gate, if that, just to have some more presence. Maybe like a back gate on their left side, something like that kind of nature. If they have like a D2 gate, they would do like an A2 or a B1. If they're staying back, that's pretty much all they need. Maybe you'll toss in an F3 or an F1 on top of that, something in the F file if you need presence on that side. But you don't want too many gates to clog up your position because they do take space. But if your opponent's running at you, they're clogging your spots or they're trying to destroy your gates, or you're doing that to your opponent, that's when you probably want more gates, because if you're fighting for control of the midboard and now you're moving onto your opponent's territory, you need probably another gate closer to the action than what you used to fight for the midboard, if that makes sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Exile. I think those are some great rules. I think also, to your point, when you are playing more mid-boardy or on your side of the board, your opponent is not aggressing, sometimes more gates just clogs up more space than it's worth. Maybe outside like factions who can summon around them ever a time, which I've ever not at least summoned 1 gate, if I can. Sometimes they're in the bottom of your deck and there's nothing you can do. But in general, I think the first gate is almost always, at least one gate's played, let's say, in the game.
Can think of maybe an Isle of Ekid game or two where I just never felt the need to put another one down. It is easy to fit a second gate on your board, even if you're playing true ranged. I think the only time, if you truly just don't need it and you're like, hey, actually, this extra magic could be really useful on my next turn, or
Or a giant octopus.
yeah, exactly. You're like, I could have a gate and 7 magic, or I could have a gate and 8 magic. I'll take the 8 magic, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very situational. Do I need to discard this gate to free up hand space, or do I need to discard this gate because I need that one more magic? Or probably most of the time, just shouldn't discard the gate and you should try and use it, depending on situations and presence and how much magic you have. But overall, those are a lot of really good tips for gate placement and gate play. Are there any last tips that you guys want to leave the community with?
One last thing I was thinking about, it's funny how every single Goblins dex wants adjacent summoning spots. So Cave Goblins, Storm Goblins, even Sand Goblins for carry, like Exile said earlier, to get wrenches easily on a unit. If you're playing a Goblin faction, really think about having gates so that your summoning spots are next to each other.
That's a great tip. I guess I would just reiterate of just think about what you're trying to get out of the position. Every single matchup is a different game of Summoner Wars. Right? I mean, every single game is a different game because of draw orders and dice and all of those kinds of things. Matchups differ a surprising amount, I find. And you might find I do some really weird structures in certain matchups, like having a D3 gate and then a C1 gate in certain things. Experiment and just try to approach each matchup as a new thing.
Well, we appreciate both you guys coming on the podcast and talking gates with us.
Yeah, it was nice to be on.
Thanks for having us.
This has been another episode of Discard for Magic, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks.